The temple did not become less dangerous because Jesus had risen. Dagon found that offensive. He had hoped resurrection would improve certain practical matters. Fewer locked doors, fewer men whispering near corners, fewer authorities with hands clean enough to appear holy and dirty enough to hold power, fewer places where a man could be killed for telling the truth in public. Instead, the truth became louder. This was not the same as safer. Peter and John still went up to the temple at prayer. That mattered, Mara said. Why? Because they did not stop being who they were. Who they were got him killed. Rome killed him. You know what I mean. Yes, that is why I answered correctly. Dagon had no defense against that kind of accuracy, so he went with them, not beside them, near enough to see. Far enough to deny purpose if denial became useful, though he knew this was the old cowardice wearing an old cloak. Mara went too, child tied against her because prayer and danger had apparently become household activities. Jerusalem at prayer hour moved with practiced urgency. People did not merely walk toward the temple. They were pulled by habit, command, hope, duty, fear, gratitude, and the desire to be seen doing what faithful people did. The approaches were crowded with bodies and petitions. Beggars knew where mercy had traffic. Sellers knew where hunger would pass. Men who could afford dignity arranged it before entering sacred space. They went up by the south stair because Peter knew the man who sold doves at the third turn and would always be greeted. John walked a half step behind Peter. He was the younger and tireder of the two that morning. He had been awake the night before, Dagon had heard, sitting with Mary near a lamp where neither of them had been ready to put the lamp out. The skin under his eyes carried the small bluish weight of a man who had been arguing inside his own head with someone who was not in the room. Mara walked beside Dagon with the child in the sling against her chest. The child was small enough to still belong to a single person at this hour of the morning, which meant he had not yet decided whether to be hungry or interested. His head was turned outward against Mara's collarbone, and his small dark eyes were doing what every child's eyes do at the approach of a great building, taking the building in as if it were a kind of whether one was being walked into. There were beggars at every gate. The poor had learned over generations where the wind of pity blew most reliably, and they sat there. The beautiful gate was the brass one on the east side, the gate Solomon's portico fed into. The brass had been worked by craftsmen out of Corinth a generation ago, paid for by a wealthy family who wanted their name remembered for piety. The surface was almost black with age in the lower panels where the rains and the touch of pilgrims' hands had darkened it. The smell that came out through the gate at the 9th hour was frankincense from the inner court, cedar from the high house beams, warm stone, the blood and ash of the morning sacrifice, and the body press of 1,000 pilgrims who had been on their feet since dawn. A Levite stood inside the gate post with his hand on the hilt of a short wooden staff, not for keeping pilgrims out, but for keeping them moving. At one gate sat a man whose body had become a place. Dagon hated that thought as soon as it arrived because it was true. The man was not old, but long suffering had made age unnecessary. His legs lay at angles that told a story before his mouth could. Friends or kin had placed him there, perhaps lovingly, perhaps wearily, perhaps both. A mat beneath him, a bowl near his hand, eyes trained not on faces, but on the moment before a hand decided whether to open. Dagon knew that skill. Everyone begging learns the weather of fingers. The mat was a goat hair mat, faded at the corners where his hands had pressed daily for years. His tunic was newer than it should have been, which meant someone in his household had recently mended or replaced it, which meant someone in his household was still trying. His sandals, the cost of sandals for a man who never walked was a question Dagon had answered for himself by the third look, were placed beside the mat, neatly, in case the day ever came when he would need them. This man was the rarer kind. He sat at the gate as if he were keeping a vigil he had not quite agreed to, as if the gate were a person who had once promised him something and he had not yet been willing to leave the spot where the promise had been made. Around him the morning moved. A woman placed a small piece of bread by his bowl. A father with 2 boys hurried his sons past without looking. A scribe stopped, dropped a coin into the bowl, said the brief words for almsgiving, and continued without breaking stride. The man at the gate had thanked the scribe before the coin had finished landing. Peter and John approached. The man called out, not loudly enough to offend, not softly enough to vanish. Peter stopped. Dagon felt the crowd adjust around the stop, annoyed before understanding. A halted holy man is a stone in a stream. People must go around and resent water for being wet. Peter looked at the man. "Look at us," Peter said. Dagon did not hear every word after that. The crowd swallowed some. The gate threw back others, but he saw the man's face change at being commanded to look instead of plead. Beggars are often looked at and rarely invited to return the gaze. The man expected coin. Dagon would have. Peter had none. That should have ended the matter. Instead, Peter gave him a name, not Peter's name, Jesus. Names were becoming dangerous in this movement, spoken over water, spoken at tombs, spoken now at the temple gate where money, mercy, and public order touched shoulders. Peter took the man's hand. Dagon held his breath. He did not mean to. The man rose badly. That was what Dagon remembered later, not smoothly. Not like a dancer discovering hidden talent. His body argued, feet found earth like strangers, ankles shook. Peter held him. John reached. The man made a sound that was not quite pain and not yet joy. Then standing became true. He stood for the first time the way a thing stands that has not had a body's full report in a long time. His knees did not lock. He did not look at his feet, which would have been the trap of a man trying to convince himself. He looked at Peter's face. He held Peter's wrist. He let the standing happen to him the way a small boat lets the tide happen to it before it decides whether to row. His first word was not a word. It was a sound a man makes when air enters his chest from a different direction. The kind of sound a man might make if he had spent 30 years breathing only into the upper half of his lungs and was now suddenly being asked to breathe into the lower half too. The sound surprised him. He looked at Peter as if Peter had asked him a question. Peter said nothing. He kept his hand on the man's wrist. The second sound was his name for God. It came out in 2 syllables in the accent of his particular village, which was not Jerusalem's accent. His mother had taught him these 2 syllables before she had taught him most other things. He had said them every morning of his life for 30 years from a mat. He had not, until that moment, ever said them standing. Then he laughed. The laugh was the laugh of a body that did not know yet whether it was allowed to laugh. The crowd broke. There is no quiet way for a known lame man to stand at a gate. People shouted. Some stepped back as if healing could spread without permission. Some pushed forward to see whether fraud had legs. A woman near Mara began crying into her own hands. A boy laughed because children know when the world has misbehaved. The healed man clung to Peter and John, then began to walk, then leap badly, then praise God with the wild gratitude of a body interrupting theology. A woman near Mara, an older woman with the bent back of a scribe's widow, lifted both her hands to her cheeks and said in Hebrew, half to herself and half to whoever might hear, "Then will the lame leap like a deer." It was a line from Isaiah. Dagon did not know the line. The line knew him anyway. Half the people in the crowd who had been raised in a synagogue from boyhood would have known it. Half were now saying it under their breath in the same moment, the way people in a crowd will speak the next line of a psalm without consulting each other, when the crowd is full enough of people who learned the psalm in the same week of the same year as boys. The line moved through the gate area like a small wind. Some of the watchers along the back of the colonnade heard the line and their faces hardened, because a prophecy fulfilling at one's own gate is harder to argue with than a doctrine in a courtyard. Dagon laughed. He could not help it. The laugh came from a place in him that had been waiting for legs to become argument. Mara looked at him. "What? Nothing. You are crying. Dust. In the temple. Holy dust." She let him have it. For one breath, the whole place seemed foolish with joy. Then Dagon saw the other faces, not the crowd, the watchers behind the crowd. Men who did not rejoice first because they had learned to ask what an event would cost authority before asking what it gave the wounded. They wore the linen of the priestly families and the gold-edged hems of Sadducean households. 2 were captains of the temple guard with the short-bladed weapons of officers whose authority came from inside the walls and stopped at them. Men whose fear wore clean cloth. Men whose concern for order awakened faster than compassion. Dagon's hand went toward his knife. Mara touched his wrist. "No, I did not." "You did." Peter spoke. This time Dagon heard enough. "Not our power, not our holiness. Jesus, the one handed over, the one denied, the one killed." God raised him, faith in his name, repent, turn. The words struck the temple stones and returned sharper. Dagon watched people receive them like blows or bread depending on what hunger they carried. The healed man stood beside Peter the whole time. That was the trouble for the authorities. A doctrine can be debated. A man walking is rude evidence. The day did not turn fast. That was almost worse. A doctrine the priest can take into custody by lunchtime is a different kind of inconvenience from a man who is still walking around at the 3rd hour after noon and is being asked, by 12 different witnesses in 4 different lanes, to describe exactly what happened. The priests, Dagon realized, had to wait for the crowd to thin before they moved. Crowds were the apostles' real protection that day. It is one thing to arrest a man inside a private house. It is another to drag him out of a colonnade full of people who have just seen a healing. The captains of the guard waited the way trained men wait. Dagon, who had spent his life knowing which alleys bent away from patrols, knew the posture. They had positioned themselves at the back of the portico so they would be there when the crowd thinned, but not before. Their captain, a tall, well-fed man with a beard combed in the older priestly style, kept his eyes on Peter the whole afternoon. Not on John, not on the healed man, Peter. He had decided early which of the two was the speaking one and was, in his own organized way, paying respect to a problem. Mara saw him too. "Sadducee," she said very softly. "How do you know?" He keeps glancing at the man's legs as if he is hoping they will fail. By evening, Peter and John were taken, not dragged like criminals exactly, not honored either. The kind of handling that says we are not afraid while arranging bodies with men who are. The healed man was not taken at first. That almost made it worse. Joy remained in the street while the voices that explained it were removed. Dagon followed at a distance until Mara caught him by the back of his robe. "Do not. They are taking them. Yes. Then someone should see where. Someone will. I can. You can also be taken. Useful. To whom?" He hated that question. She held the child between them, sleeping through law as he slept through most things. "We need you outside doors," she said. "I am tired of doors. Then learn to be tired and useful." He almost snapped at her. Then the healed man shouted again, praising God so loudly even the men leading Peter and John looked back. Dagon exhaled. "Fine. Do not say fine like obedience is martyrdom. I will stand here joyfully. Do not lie either." They returned to the room after dark. The room knew before they spoke. Rooms do that when enough fear has lived in them. Every face turned. Mary stood. Asher stopped mid-sentence. Yos, the boy Dagon had fed instead of chasing, looked delighted by danger until he noticed no one else was. "Taken," Dagon said. That was enough. Mara fed the child before she fed herself, which was the order she did everything in. The baby drank the way babies drink, completely and dishonestly, as if he had not eaten in a week, when in fact he had eaten an hour ago in a corridor near the temple, while his mother held him with one arm and watched a man stand for the first time in his life. The lamp on the high shelf needed trimming. Mara reached without looking, the way she reached for the lamp at home, and the lamp here understood her hand because Mara's hands had been understood by every lamp in every room she had ever crossed. The carved bird sat on the shelf next to the lamp. It always did, in any room they were staying in long enough to call a room. Eliezer was too small still to know the bird was there for him. He would learn its presence the way he learned everything important, slowly in pieces, without anyone explaining. Mara had carried the bird since the year he was born. She had set it on every shelf in every room. It had begun to acquire a particular kind of polish at one wing where her thumb pressed it whenever she set it down. She set it down now. The wing turned its small gleam upward toward the ceiling beams. Dagon watched her do this without understanding why he had begun watching it. Prayer began badly. Dagon liked that. Perfect prayer after an arrest would have seemed suspicious. People interrupted each other. Someone asked whether they should hide certain names. Someone else said hiding names was unbelief. Mara said hiding names from fools was sometimes stewardship and everyone should calm down. Mary asked who had seen the healed man last. A woman near the back began reciting a psalm and broke on the 3rd line. Then the room found one voice. Not smooth, shared. They prayed not for safety first. That angered Dagon. Then it humbled him. They prayed for boldness. Boldness, he thought, was a dangerous thing to request from a God who answered directly. Peter and John returned the next day, bruised by custody, unbroken by warning. Carrying the strange brightness of men told to stop speaking who had discovered silence was no longer available to them. The room erupted, not as at Pentecost. This was smaller, rougher, human, hands on shoulders, questions, water, bread, men asking exactly what was said before the answer could be given, women inspecting faces and sleeves for damage. The healed man came too, still walking, still somehow surprised by the ground. Peter told them the council had commanded them not to speak or teach in Jesus' name. Yos whispered near Dagon, "Will they? Speak! Stop!" Dagon looked at Peter. Peter looked exhausted, afraid, and glad. "No," Dagon said. The boy nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed some private theory about adults becoming stupid after baptism. The room prayed again. This time Dagon joined before he could talk himself out of it. He did not pray well. He said, "Do not make us stupid with fear." Mara heard and smiled into her hands. The room shook. Dagon would not later know how to say it without sounding like a man improving a story. Perhaps the earth moved. Perhaps the room did. Perhaps fear inside them lost its footing all at once, and that felt like beams shifting. Whatever it was, the prayer did not leave the room as it found it. A small clay cup on the table near the window rocked once and steadied. A bowl of olives near the door shifted by the width of 2 fingers and stopped. The child in Mara's arms woke without crying, which was the more unusual thing. Children woken by buildings tend to announce it. He looked around at the adults with the calm assessment of someone who has decided the adults are responsible for explaining what just happened. No adult explained. He went back to sleep against his mother's shoulder with the resigned wisdom of a small person who has concluded the adults are useless for some questions. Dagon's hand had not moved to his knife. He noticed this only afterward, when he reached for his belt by habit and found that his hand had been on the floor in front of him the entire time, pressed flat against the boards. That meant something. He did not yet know what. Asher came around the room with a cloth, picking up the few cups that had tipped, and Mara helped him in the absent way 2 people who had served each other's tables many times help each other. No one spoke. Afterward, Peter spoke quietly with the healed man. Dagon watched from the doorway. The man stood very still. Standing still was new work for him. Mary came beside Dagon. "You saw the gate?" "Yes." "What did it look like?" "Like money had been interrupted." Mary nodded. "And now?" Dagon looked at Peter John, the walking man, the room rearranging around warning. "Now witness is chargeable." "It always was." "Yes," Dagon said, "but now they know it." Outside, Jerusalem continued. Coins, prayers, soldiers, arguments, beggars,